Aloha, champions, and welcome back. Mr. Chambers is going to be reading 3 chapters today from Powerless by Matthew Cody. I'll be reading chapters 8, 9, and 10. While I'm reading this, for your extra credit, your optional activity is to answer these questions. Question number 1. What does Daniel discover on Simon's 13th birthday? Question number 2. Why do you think Simon is so sad and scared at his birthday? So those are the 2 questions I want you to answer. Listen as I read along chapters 8 through 10 of Powerless by Matthew Cody. Chapter 8, Moon Gazing. You know, I totally could have gone in there and saved that baby. Oh yeah? What would you have done? Shocked the fire away? Your wisps are suddenly fire retarded? All I'm saying is that I could have done more if Mr. Superhero would have let me. Eric just acted on instinct. Molly, no, it's true. Well, we all did our part. Good job, team. I was scared, Eric. So was I, Louisa. But you didn't let your fear get the better of you. You did good. All I'm saying is that if you had run into a terrorist or some kind of alien bounty hunter in there, you would have totally needed me to help. Of course, Simon. Of course. Daniel and the supers were sitting in Rohan's backyard looking for shooting stars. Or at least Rohan and Daniel were looking for shooting stars. The rest were replaying the events of the big fire. Apparently a house near the edge of town had caught fire and the mother had almost died from the smoke. When they got there, Eric rushed in and saved a 2-year-old baby, then went back in for the unconscious mother. When the fire trucks arrived, she and her baby were both sitting on the grass safe. The supers were nowhere around. Okay, looking for these shooting stars is the lamest of Daniel's many lame ideas, said Simon. I'm going home to play Demolition Raceway. I'm having a good time, said Louisa, barely stifling a yawn. But it is getting kind of late. It's past Rose's bedtime. Rose was snoring softly in Louisa's lap. It was fun, though, Daniel, she said. I would do it again. Thanks, Louisa, answered Daniel. I'm sorry, guys. They said there would be a big meteor shower tonight. Maybe it's just too cloudy down here. Don't sweat it, Daniel, said Eric. We'll see them next time around. Race you home, Molly? Eric turned, but Molly was already up in the air. You're toast, she shouted, disappearing into the distance. Darn it, said Eric, calling after her. Give me half a chance, why don't you? The rest of them waved goodbye as they got on their bikes. Daniel looked over at his friend, but Rohan's attention was focused intently on one part of the sky. The 2 of them were alone now, and it had gotten very quiet. It was a nice change. What you looking at? There, said Rohan, pointing. See the moon rising? Oh yeah, I can see it. Not like I can. Daniel mulled this over for a minute. He knew his friend could see things at far distances, but the moon was hundreds of thousands of miles away. You mean you can see all that way? Details and everything? Yep. Then how come you wear glasses? I'm farsighted. I need these for reading. So you can see craters on the surface of the moon, but you need glasses to read a book? Yep. That's weird. Yeah, well. Daniel smiled and looked back at the night sky. The waxing moon hung low in the sky like a silver, barely a fingernail to Daniel's eyes. So, what's it look like to you, I mean? Remember the star show we saw at the planetarium? Rohan asked. his eyes never leaving the sky. Those pictures they took with that big telescope? Yeah? Well, I don't need a telescope. Right now, I'm looking at the Sea of Tranquility. There's a sea on the moon? You're nuts. It's not a real sea, it's just what they call it. It's actually a huge desert where the sand never shifts, never moves, because of course there isn't any wind on the moon. Spooky, said Daniel. Kind of, but it's beautiful too. Rohan? Yeah? Do you ever get afraid of losing your powers? Afraid of, what happens when you turn 13? Sure I do, answered Rohan. We all do. But there's nothing we can do about it. It's going to happen to all of us, no matter what Molly says. Molly? What does Molly say? Rohan sighed. Molly's one of my best friends, but she's a troublemaker. She's always questioning the rules, especially that one. The third rule. It ends at 13. She just won't accept that some good things are destined to come to an end. But you do? You can just accept that when you turn 13, you'll lose all of this? Eric believes that we can change our future by doing good deeds now. He thinks that, like Johnny and Noble, we can grow up and become superheroes or something. I think it's a nice thought, and it sure would be great if that were true. But, said Daniel, my family believes in duty, Daniel. And I know the rest of you make fun of me for being a good kid. But I can't help it. It's who I am. I think we've been given these powers for a reason, and the trade-off is to be responsible and follow the rules. That is our duty. Maybe it's just our destiny to give up our powers when we turn 13, said Rohan, finally taking his eyes off the bright moon. You can't fight fate, Daniel, and you won't be happy as long as you keep trying. Daniel looked at his friend in a whole new way. Rohan had always seemed a little strange, what with his tiny ties and loafers, but now he seemed almost wise. Wow, said Daniel. Maybe you should have Molly over for dinner sometime. Explain all of that to her. It would never work, answered Rohan. Molly hates curry. Daniel laughed, and Rohan said goodnight as he went inside. As Daniel pulled his windbreaker tight around his neck, a voice startled him from the dark. Hey, new kid. Daniel looked up to see Molly standing by the edge of the yard. Oh, hey, answered Daniel. I didn't see you there. That's 'cause I just got here, said Molly, pointing to the sky. Oh, got it, said Daniel. Man, she really is fast. I thought you were headed home. Molly wrinkled her nose. I wasted Eric and then got bored. Thought I'd see if you guys were still here. Oh, well, I was just heading home, actually. Cool. I'll walk with you. Daniel did a quick double take. Surprise. Molly usually had only the bare minimum of contact with him. And this was certainly the first time she'd offered to spend time with him alone. He was immediately suspicious. They walked together in silence for the first few minutes. Daniel didn't understand why he always found it so hard to talk to Molly. But it had something to do with the way she looked at him, as if she was examining him, or waiting for him to do or say something. Whatever it was about as much fun as watching Georgie clap. Daniel decided to use this opportunity to say something he had been meaning to say for a long time. I never thanked you. Molly made a face. You never thanked me for what? That first day, when we were moving in, you saved Georgie from being hit by that car. Molly just shrugged. was no big deal. Yes, it was. And I didn't even see you do it. Are you really that fast? This made Molly smile a bit. When I need to be? Yeah, I'm that fast. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. I should have said it a long time ago. Molly chewed on her lip. It looked as though she was thinking something over. Why don't we just say that you owe me one? Sure, deal. They walked a little farther without saying anything more. Daniel decided that talking was certainly better than silence, so he tried to strike up a little more conversation. Boy, Rohan sure sucks at hide and seek. Tell me about it. He's too busy listening to the leaves grow or some other weird things. Daniel laughed. Yeah, but at least he's not a jerk like Simon. The hair on the top of my head still singed. Molly stopped walking. Just lay off, Simon. Okay? I didn't mean anything by it, he muttered. You don't know anything about anything, new kid. Molly suddenly bristled with anger. Daniel had had enough. What is that supposed to mean? All I said was that Simon can be a jerk sometimes, because it's true. How many times have I gotten shocked in the face for no reason? And why you go out of your way to defend him, when you are such a pain to everyone else, especially me? It's Simon's birthday next week, she said. So what? Does that mean you'll be nice to me when my birthday comes around? Molly turned to Daniel and was shocked to see tears in her eyes. But the tears didn't stop her from shouting. Don't you get it? He's turning 13. We are all being nice to Simon because in a week, we won't know him anymore. Daniel was stunned. He never even wondered about Simon's age before, but now he knew. Oh, he said, I'm sorry. What else was there to say? Molly rubbed her eyes, angrily brushing away the tears that had pooled there. Michael was the last one, and he was my best friend. He was the best flyer there ever was. Then one morning, he just wakes up and forgets it all. He was so determined not to that he even wrote himself notes. He drew pictures so that he would remember. But it didn't work. Nothing ever works. He stopped hanging out with us right after that. Now at school, he doesn't even look at me. Eric and Rohan will tell you that it's just the way things are, that we all need to accept it. But that's not true. Something bad happens when we turn 13, and I won't just accept that. Daniel didn't know what to say. After all, if it had been him with those powers, he would never want to be ordinary. Not ever. Molly had calmed down somewhat and was done shouting. But she didn't let go of her anger either. Daniel could tell she was simply holding it back, keeping it in check. And you know who's next after that, don't you? She asked. Daniel shook his head, but he could guess. Eric, she answered. And you know what this town will be like without him? What Clay and Bud would be like without Eric around? No one can stop Clay. He's just too strong. Too strong. Daniel wondered whom she was trying to convince, him or herself. Molly, why are you telling me all this? Why are you even hanging out with me? I'm sorry for what's going to happen to Simon. I really am, but it's obvious you don't like me. So why are you here? Because you're the only one, Daniel, she said, looking at him again. You're the only one who can break the third rule forever. Molly wore an expression he had never seen on her before, one that was almost worse than anger. Worse because it was directed at him. It was hope. You're the only one who can save us. Daniel was stunned, and he was pretty sure that Molly was crazy. If the supers of Noble's Green couldn't stop whatever was happening to them, what could he do? But how? I'm nothing special. And that's why you're perfect. See, I have this plan. It'll work. So shut up, walk, and listen. The next day at school, Daniel managed to avoid Molly and all of the supers for that matter. What would he say to them? Did Molly expect him to lie for her? Though he hadn't yet made up his mind, he was very close to doing so. What Molly wanted from him was very simple and also very frightening. Molly suspected you didn't just wake up on your birthday without powers. Something had to take them away. And she wasn't alone in her suspicions. Eric had told her a story once about a couple of supers who decided to try and save their friend. On the night before his 13th birthday, they stayed over at his house. The plan had been to stay awake with him all night, to keep a watch over him and to keep him safe. But when the three friends emerged from the house the next morning, all three were the same. They were ordinary. Even though two of the friends were only 12 at the time, they had undergone the same transformation because they had tried to save their friend. Whatever had taken his powers had also come for theirs. No one had tried anything like it since. This was where Daniel came into the picture. Since he had no powers to start with, he was in no danger of losing them. He could stay with Simon and at the very least bring back information about what really happened on a super's 13th birthday. At best, he might actually be able to stop it. Him, Daniel Corrington. Hey, anyone sitting here? Daniel looked up from his lunch of tuna fish and crackers and saw a boy standing over him with a lunch tray. He was a little older than Daniel, and though they had never spoken, Daniel knew him very well. Rohan had pointed him out several times. The boy was Michael, who was once upon a time had been the best flyer that there ever was. No, answered Daniel. Go right ahead. So you're new, aren't you? He asked, sitting down across from Daniel. Yeah, sort of. My family moved here in August, just before school began. You like it? Daniel thought for a moment about all that he had seen and heard in just a few months. The exhilaration of flight, the cold fear of finding himself alone with Clay and Bud, things he had never dreamed would have happened to him. I like it a lot. That's good, said Michael, without much enthusiasm. It was strange to be sitting here talking to Michael after all he had heard about him. It reminded him of the first time that he saw Graham after finding out that she was sick. He hadn't known then what to say or what to do, and he'd been terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. Looking at Michael, Daniel felt the same way. They ate without saying much of anything while Daniel tried not to stare. It was hard for him, though he wanted to examine Michael's every move to see if he acted the same as the other supers. Did he move differently or talk differently? Daniel wondered if the signs would be visible if you knew what to look for. So, I've seen you hanging out with Eric and Molly and those guys, said Michael out of the blue. Are you friends with them? Sure, I guess. That's good. They're cool kids. You know, I used to hang out with them until... Michael seemed to be struggling to find the right word. Well, I guess I just got too old or something. Too old? Huh? I don't know. I guess we got interested in different things. Oh, said Daniel. I guess that happens. I just wanted to keep playing the same dumb games, the same stuff that we did when we were little kids. And I don't know, it just seemed silly all of a sudden. Michael stared at his food, but he was no longer eating. How is Molly these days? He asked. She's fine, I guess. Boy, me and Molly, we used to race each other all the time. I think, to see who was the fastest runner, I guess. I don't really remember. It's strange. You'd think I'd be able to, right? Michael rubbed his eyes with his palms as if they were trying to wipe the sleep away. Daniel decided to try something there. Something he knew was reckless, but still worth a shot. Molly's told me about that, he said. She said that you two would race to see who was the fastest. Liar. What was that? Michael looked at Daniel in the eyes for the first time since sitting down, and a change came over his face. Michael seemed close to something now, very close, but it was still just out of view. Daniel leaned in and whispered, I know all about it, Michael. I know that you flew. They say that you were the best flyer there ever was. Even Molly says so. Can't you remember? Michael was speaking slowly now, and he shut his eyes tight. I remember the wind. But then his eyes popped back open, and he started as if someone had just poured a bucket of ice water all over his head. I used to dream a lot, he said, suddenly relaxed. I dreamt that I could fly almost every night. But I haven't had that dream in a long, long time. Without another word, Michael stood and walked off. He didn't bother with his lunch tray, and he didn't say goodbye to Daniel, or even acknowledge that they had been talking. He just wandered away, slowly into the crowd of kids, milling about the cafeteria. Kids who were worried about other boys, girls, grades, and parents. Kids with ordinary worries. Kids who were just like him. Watching him disappear into the crowd, Daniel knew what he would do. His mind was made up, and he had Michael to thank for that. Chapter 9. Simon's birthday. Daniel soon discovered that when Molly said she had a plan, what she really meant was, I have this kind of general idea of something that should happen, so you go and you make it work. Molly Lee was brave. Molly Lee was persistent. Molly Lee was not, however, a detailed person. The first part of the plan was secrecy. Daniel didn't like lying to Eric and Rohan, but Molly convinced him that if they had found out, Rohan would scold them and Eric might go so far as to try and stop them. As Molly had said before, those two believed in the rules and they didn't hold with anyone breaking them. So after much debate, Daniel and Molly decided that the only members of their little conspiracy would be those who needed to know. The two of them, of course, and Simon. Daniel was surprised that Simon's reaction when they finally clued him into what they had planned. Far from being grateful for the risk Daniel was about to take, he seemed to resent that Daniel had to be involved at all. He acted as if it were a great inconvenience to have Daniel stay with him on the night before his birthday, and he laid down a ridiculous number of rules. Daniel could stay in his room, but he wasn't allowed to touch any of his stuff. You know, that sort of thing. At one point, Daniel was ready to call the whole thing off, until Molly quietly reminded him that they weren't only doing this for Simon, but they were doing it for Eric too. Molly wanted to be involved, but they decided that she needed to keep a safe distance away. She would camp out in a pup tent in the woods next to Simon's house. Her parents thought that she was sleeping over at Louisa's. From there, she could keep an eye on Simon's bedroom window without actually putting herself in any jeopardy, or so they had hoped. Daniel argued for Molly to stay at her own house far away from any risk, but Molly stubbornly refused. The pup tent was the best compromise that they could come up with. As for Daniel, he was left with the near impossible task of packing. On the afternoon before Simon's 13th birthday, Daniel stood in his room staring at the pile of junk that he had spread out all over his bed. After all, what do you pack for guarding a super-powered kid? He decided that overkill was his best bet. 1 flashlight, extra batteries, a 2-liter bottle of soda to help him stay awake, a book of home stories to help him pass the time if nothing happened, a whistle to call for help if something did happen, a bag of beef jerky, a compass, some rope, an instant camera, his magnifying glass, and an extra pair of underwear. Just in case. I thought you were going to a sleepover. Where's your friend live? The bottom of a well? Daniel was startled by the thin voice from over his shoulder. When he turned around, he was surprised to see Graham was standing in the attic doorway. Graham, aren't you supposed to be in bed? Ah, she said, making a face. I'm tired of looking at the same 4 walls all day long. I need to get my blood moving. But Daniel could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the crackle in her lungs that sounded like paper, and he noticed the way she leaned into the dorm frame for support. The simple trip up the stairs had taken every bit of extra strength that she had. He quickly brushed his pile of junk aside and made a space for her on his bed. Here, Graham, sit down. Well, don't mind if I do. Just while I catch my breath. She'd sat down heavily on the edge of his bed. It was a slow process, careful and deliberate. These days she always moved like that, as if she were made of a glass in a house full of hard edges. When she'd settled, she gave a satisfied thump of her cane and gestured toward the gear strewn all over Daniel's bed. So is this what kids do for fun these days? She fingered the coil of rope suspiciously. Planning to tie someone up and force feed them beef jerky and soda all night long? Daniel smiled, but he could feel a tight ball of guilt winding up in his stomach. He didn't like having to lie to her. Not to Graham. It's just stuff, he said. We were thinking about camping out in Simon's yard. Graham's eyes narrowed as she mulled this over. Will you be careful then? There's a whole lot of forest around here. You wouldn't be the first child to be carried off in the middle of the night by rabid raccoons. They grow big in these parts, you know. Daniel laughed. I'll be extra careful. By the way, I hear you met little Molly Lee from across the street. Such a sweetheart. A real cutie, too. Don't you think? At the mention of Molly, the ball of Daniel's stomach did a small, unexpected flip. Why was Graham smiling? She's a okay, he said quickly. For a girl, I mean, she's fun to hang out with. Actually, she's more like a boy in a lot of ways. Why was it so stuffy in here? Well, continued Graham, I remember when she was just a chubby little thing in pigtails and frilly dresses. The poor girl's mother tried for years to dress her like one of those porcelain dolls, but it never looked right on Molly. She dirtied up more beautiful dresses. Eventually, her parents must have just given up. Daniel smiled at the thought of Molly wearing a frilly anything. Can't say I blame them, he said. When Molly gets her mind set on something, that's the end of it. You don't say. And what she got her mind set on these days? Another stomach jump. Just what was Graham getting at? Nothing. I mean, she's always on about something or another, but it's never a big deal. You know, girl stuff. Graham nodded and rested her chin on her hands as she twirled the cane between her fingers. Her bent shape was silhouetted against the attic window. Just over her shoulder, Daniel could see the sun drooping low over the trees. In the pink evening glow, she looked as she had before the cancer, rosy and full of health. I'm glad that you're making friends, Daniel. I know that coming here couldn't have been easy on you. A new town, a new school. There's a lot of grown-up stuff going on here, with me being sick and all. But I don't want you to forget to be a kid. At least not for a little while longer. Daniel nodded. You know, this was my room when I was younger, she continued, her gaze far away. Did you know that? Oh, sure, this house has been around for a long, long time. Much longer than this old lady. I remember staring out that window at Mount Noble for what must have been hours at a time. I'd stare at the clouds and the sky and the stars at night. You know, as you get older, the gray matter starts to fail on you and your memories get all fuzzy. They disappear into mist. I don't remember much from my childhood, but I do remember staring out that window and dreaming. I bet I had wonderful dreams. She reached over, pinched Daniel on the arm. Her eyes looked a little moist, but Daniel couldn't be sure in the fading light. Don't grow up too fast, Daniel. No matter what happens, promise me that. I promise, Graham, he said. I promise. And he meant it. Later that night, Daniel was forced to sit through an awkward dinner with Simon's family. He basically had to pretend that he and Simon were best buddies, which was nearly impossible to do when Simon was actually around. Throughout the meal, Simon took advantage of every opportunity to make a joke at Daniel's expense. Daniel had never been a fan of pork chops, and when he didn't clean his plate, Simon laughingly accused him of watching his figure for Molly. Daniel wanted to tell Simon to shut his fat little face, but since he was sitting at Simon's dinner table, he was forced to grin and bear it. After dinner, the two boys were excused from the table, and they spent the rest of the evening in Simon's room. Simon was a speed freak, which Daniel thought was ironic considering that he was even slower runner than Daniel. His only power seemed to be creating those little electric wisps. He had decorated his room with NASCAR posters and plastic models of sports cars. There were no books to be found, but plenty of video games, most of which involved racing. Just looking at his room, Daniel was reminded of how little the two of them had in common. They were two members of the same secret club who otherwise wouldn't give each other the time of day. Still, for one night at least, they were stuck with each other. Simon sat at the foot of his bed and untangled a video game controller from a mass of wires. He started playing some kind of vehicle demolition game, one in which his car seemed to earn points by repeatedly smashing into an ice cream truck. Daniel watched him play in silence for a few minutes. "That your high score?" Daniel finally asked, trying to pass the time. "Yeah," grunted Simon. "So what's the point of the game? Is there some kind of goal, or do you just keep wrecking things? Or I'm just beating on Mr. Crazy's cream truck to get enough power-ups to get to the next level. And you're not helping me by talking at me." "Well, sorry, but what am I supposed to do all night while you play your game?" "Not my problem." That was it. Daniel was tired of Simon's smug attitude. If he didn't care about what happened, why should Daniel? They would find some other way to help Eric. You know what? Forget it. Just forget the whole thing. I'm going home. Who cares? You're not here to help me anyway. It's Eric you're all worried about. Daniel felt a twinge of guilt. He probably should have seen it coming. But the truth was that he had never really considered Simon's feelings about all of this. "That's not true," said Daniel. "Molly is worried about everyone, even you." "And what about you? Who are you doing this for?" Daniel hesitated for a second before finally caving. "Fine. I'm doing this for Eric and for Molly. But it's not like you've ever been nice to me. You're pretty much a jerk to everyone." Simon threw his game controller to the ground. "That's because you're all such a bunch of losers." With that, Daniel picked up his backpack and headed for the door. That kid was unbelievable. "Happy birthday," he said without turning around. Daniel was just opening the door when a sound caught his attention. A sound he recognized but just couldn't believe he was hearing. Not from Simon, anyway. He turned and watched as Simon wiped his nose on his sleeve. His face was red and wet with tears. He wasn't just crying, he was bawling. Being scared stinks," he managed between sobs. "Yeah," answered Daniel. "Yeah, it really does." Daniel stood on the threshold for a moment or two. Then slowly he shut the door again. He put his backpack down on the floor, walked over, picked up a game controller. "Got another one of these?" he asked. A few hours later, they sat together keeping watch out of the window. Every 15 minutes, one of them would aim a flashlight into the trees, flicking it on 2 times. Then Molly's own light would shine back at them twice from her little campsite hidden in the woods to signal that everything was normal. If one of them saw anything suspicious, they would hit the light 3 times. If there was immediate danger, they would flick the light on and off and on and off and keep it blinking until help arrived. Once Simon's fear had broken through his bravado, he and Daniel had gotten along fine. Better than fine, actually. They had even managed to have fun. They played video games practically all evening, cracking each other up as they smashed their electronic cars and trucks into another. They nearly made themselves sick on Daniel's beef jerky and soda. It turned out that Simon was a master burper, and with the aid of a little carbonation could burp his way through the alphabet. It was only after Simon's mom poked her head in the door and informed them that it was bedtime, and therefore time for lights out, that things got serious again. The plan was to keep watch together at the window, communicating with Molly and flashing, flickering lights. Daniel set up some of the equipment he brought. He wore his point-and-shoot camera around his neck, had his magnifying glass in his pocket, and at one point Simon gave him a baseball bat for protection. Danielle just set that aside. He didn't know what they might end up facing, but he was pretty sure that a 12-year-old armed with a baseball bat probably wouldn't do any good. It was sometime after midnight when Simon spotted the shape in the dark. Daniel was dozing, struggling to stay awake, when he realized Simon was tugging at his shirt sleeve. Look, he whispered. Over there, by the street lamp. Daniel jumped to his feet and squinted at the light shining beyond the trees. He searched the shadows. I don't see anything. Something was there a second ago. Daniel immediately wished he had brought a pair of binoculars. He cursed himself for forgetting to pack something so obvious. Plenty of underwear, but no binoculars. You sure? He asked. Maybe Simon's fear was getting the best of him. Yes, I'm telling you, something is moving out there. There, look. And Daniel saw it. Two little specks of light moving through the darkness along the tree line. They were close together, reflecting an ambient glow, kind of like a cat's eyes. But they were too high off the ground to belong to any cat. Whatever these eyes belonged to, it wasn't headed for Simon's house. It was moving away from them, into the trees. It's headed for Molly, whispered Simon. Daniel grabbed the flashlight and flicked the on-off button 3 times. He waited. No response. He then started flicking the light rapidly, on and off, on and off, on and off. Still, nothing. The shining eyes were gone now. But Daniel had the sinking suspicion that whatever it had moved deeper into the woods and closer to Molly. We've got to warn her, said Daniel. Is there a way down from here? The trellis, but you're crazy if you think I'm going out there. Daniel started to argue until he saw the fear in Simon's eyes. The poor kid had been dreading this night for so long, but now that it was here, he was petrified, nearly paralyzed with fear. All right, you stay here. If you see anything else, hit the flashlight. Then, against his better judgment, he swung his body out the window and slipped his feet and hands into the rails of the trellis. He had just started his descent when he heard Simon hiss at him. Daniel looked up to see Simon handing him the baseball bat through the window. This time, Daniel took it. The grass was wet with dew, and Daniel nearly slipped on his butt running across the yard. If he hurried, he feared he could get to Molly's camp from the other direction first, hopefully avoiding a confrontation in the dark with whatever it was in the woods. As he snuck along through the trees, he wondered at the ridiculousness of his situation. In a town full of child superheroes, what was he trying to do? Save the day? I'm a moron, he almost said out loud. He found Molly's yellow pup tent in a clearing 30 yards into the woods. But there was no Molly. The surrounding trees were thick and black in the moonlight. His heart was beating wildly in his chest as he realized that anything could be hiding just a few feet away and he wouldn't even see it. He decided to chance a whisper. Molly. Molly. What? Answered in an irritated voice from the bushes. He spun around to see Molly Lee trudging out of the brush, looking thoroughly peeved. What are you doing here? She asked. Me? Where were you? We shone the light, but there was no answer. She scowled at him. I had to go, okay? Go? Go where? Just go. Molly's face was red and she sighed. I had to go. Oh, he said, feeling awkward. What are you doing? Molly was cut off by the sound of something crashing through the brush. It was moving fast, no longer bothering them with secrecy, and it was coming straight for them. Is that Simon? She asked, turning toward the sound. With no time to explain, and for reasons unknown even to him, Daniel found himself pushing Molly behind him and stepping in front of whatever was about to appear. He brandished his bat high and shouted, "Molly, fly!" But it was too late. He barely had time to get the words out before something slammed into him, knocking him off of his feet with a loud oomph. There was a mass of flailing arms and legs, and something sticky was clinging to his face. A voice was shouting, "Get it off! Get it off!" But it didn't sound like his. "Daniel, what are you doing? Let go of it." "Huh?" Daniel sputtered as he got his first good look at his opponent. Hi," said Rohan under him. He was dirty and sweaty, but it was definitely Rohan. He was clawing at a spider web that had clung to his face. The light from Daniel's flashlight reflected off Rohan's now crooked glasses in the dark. The light reflected off his glasses in the dark, like two cat eyes moving through the trees. "Oh man," said Daniel. "It was you I saw from Simon's window." "Rohan, what are you doing out here?" said Molly, her hands on her hips. Then she turned on Daniel. "And what are you doing running around swinging a baseball bat? You're gonna hurt someone." Daniel stood up and offered Rohan his hand. The two boys wiped the dirt and leaves from their hair and looked at Molly sheepishly. "Well," she asked. "I thought he was a monster," said Daniel. "Uh-huh," said Molly. "And if he was, you were going to rush to my rescue with a baseball bat?" "Yeah, I guess," said Daniel, wincing at the absurdity of his own bravery. He was prepared for one of Molly's tongue lashings, but to his surprise, she just looked at him in a weird way. "And you?" she said, finally facing Rohan. "What are you doing here?" Rohan was busy wiping his glasses on his shirt tail. "I came to stop you to try to talk some sense into you guys. I had no idea I'd be attacked by Slugger over there." "What are you talking about?" Molly asked, her face a mask. "We're just camping." "Ah, come off it, Molly. You guys have been acting all secretive and suspicious for days now. You two barely spoke until a week ago, and now you're on a campout together? And you just happened to pick the woods next to Simon's house on the night before his 13th birthday?" "You've been spying on us," Molly said, poking Rohan with a finger. "You used your powers and you listened in, didn't you?" "Of course I did, you dork. But only because I knew you were about to make a huge mistake." A thought struck Daniel like a hammer blow. "Eric," he asked, Did you tell Eric?" Rohan rearranged his glasses on his face and sighed. "No, but I should have. You guys are messing with things that are best left alone." Molly folded her arms across her chest. "Says you. I bet Simon sees it different." "It's Simon's time, Molly. And if you're not careful, you're going to end up just like him." Daniel was about to interrupt when he saw a light flicker through the trees. "Oh, shoot! It's Simon! He's got to be crazy worried by now." Daniel took Molly's flashlight and switched it on twice to signal for all clear. The light from Simon's window flashed back. 1, 2. "I should get back," said Daniel. 3, 4, 5, 6. "Something's wrong," Molly whispered. The light was flashing on and off desperately. "We've got to help him," said Molly as she started to move, but Rohan wrapped his arms tightly around her. "Let go," she screamed. But Rohan held her firm. Molly was fast and a flyer, but she was no stronger than your average 12-year-old girl. She couldn't shake Rohan loose. "You can't go, Molly," said Rohan. "You'll end up just like him." Molly was crying tears of frustration, and she wrestled with her friend. What about Simon? She pleaded. Off in the distance was a sudden popping sound like small firecrackers, and from Simon's window came the flashes of little balls of light. Simon's wisps. He's fighting back, said Molly. Daniel, said Rohan. Go! But Daniel was already running in the distance. He could hear Molly shouting for him to hurry, and he ran as fast as he could. Branches scraped his face, and thorns cut his legs as he sprinted through the underbrush. But he didn't dare slow down. He had made a friend tonight, and that friend was in trouble. When he reached the trellis, the lightning from Simon's wisps had already ceased, and there was an eerie silence in the air, accompanied by the ozone smell of electricity. Daniel had been in such a hurry that he didn't remember to pick up the bat. All he had was the camera around his neck. Nevertheless, he climbed. His hands were shaking with fear, but somehow he managed to make them work, planting one after the other as he scaled the wall to Simon's bedroom window. It was dark inside, and through the open window Daniel smelled something new, a pungent odor like burnt hair. As he peered over the ledge, a blast of cold air hit him in the face, and he saw a hooded shape standing in the darkness. It was tall like an adult, but only vaguely human-shaped. In the blackness of Simon's room, the figure stood out in its absence of light, a thing darker than dark itself. It was a creature made of shadow except for a small beating heart at the center of it, a faint green glow the size of a man's fist that pulsed with a sickly light. The creature had draped itself over Simon's inert body, which lay sprawled out over his bed. The whole shape of the thing seemed wrong somehow. It might have been an effect of the darkness, a trick of the eyes, but the shadow itself seemed to undulate. It rippled like waves on water. It chilled Daniel to his core, and for some reason made him think of hundreds of night black rats squirming in the dark. As if reading his thoughts, the hooded thing turned and looked at him. At least it appeared to be looking at him. In the dark, he couldn't make out any features, so he couldn't be sure that it really even had eyes. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. He was alone and unarmed. The shape drifted a step closer, and as it did, the unnatural cold got worse. The frozen air seemed to emanate from the shadow itself. Daniel did the only thing he could think. He snapped a picture. The flashbulb exploded and his eyes danced with spots, but for a second at least, the figure paused. It regarded him silently and seemed interested in the camera in his hands. Daniel started back down the trellis and had just taken his foot off the top rung when the shadow, sensing his retreat, rushed toward him. Daniel hit the camera button again. Flash! Flash! The bright camera bulb was making Daniel almost totally blind now. He prayed that the flashes were having the same effect on the shadowy figure. He moved his foot down but missed the next rung. As he slid off the trellis, he reached out with his free hand, only to grab a fistful of air. For a split second, Daniel dropped and hoped that Eric would be there once more to catch him. But there was no miraculous rescue this time, and the last thing he felt was his body hitting the wet grass and something breaking inside of him. Then he felt nothing at all. So I know at the beginning of this video I said I would read chapter 10 as well, but we are almost an hour in. So I'm going to stop here. That's the end of chapter 9. Remember, I know this is probably reversed for you, but the questions you have for today is A. What does Daniel discover on Simon's 13th birthday? And B. Why do you think Simon is so scared and sad on his birthday? Answer those two questions. Thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you later.